geçen haftanın sonrasında şu anda kaldığımız yerden devam ediyoruz. Avrupa Birliği Fintech düzenlemelerinin Fintech'in stratejik çerçevesi şeklinde ilerleyeceğiz. Şöyle bir de WhatsApp grubumuz aktif, oradan da dahil edebilirsiniz. Bir de aynı zamanda kontrol edilmiş şuradan da aktifleştiğim diğer sisteminde şurada baktığınızda ABD'deki mevcut nitelik düzenleyici çerçeveyi ödeme direktifleri, ödeme hizmetleri direktifi PSD ile bir ele alıyoruz. Ardından bu konudaki DORA dediğimiz dijital operasyonların yasasına MiCA dediğimiz kripto düzenlemeler çerçevesinde ve kara para aklamasına yönelik düzenlemeleri ele alarak toparlıyoruz. Bunun dışında tek ve süteklerimiz uygulamaları var. Bunlar ilgili başlıklarda inceleyecek ayrı bir şey. Dijital ve Avrupa'nın dijital para stratejisinde ele alıp inceleyerek mümkün. En başta bizim en önemli olan altta belirttiğim 4 tane üzerinde duracağız. Bizim yoğunluğumuz burada gidecek. O yüzden hemen hızlı başlayalım. Zamanda etkin kontrol edilmek adına böyle ilerleyelim. Hemen başlayalım.
Hi, my name is Otto Ketman. I'm working on the product side for our authentication.
Sesle ilgili sıkıntı yok mu online'da? Tamam.
And I'm working on the PSD2 rollout. So PSD2 is the second payment directive that was created by the European Union. PSD2 is introducing a mandate to perform strong customer authentication for payments in scope of the regulation itself. The main aim and the main goal of PSD2 is to increase the overall security of the payment landscape within the European Union and to protect the shopper from fraudulent transactions. PSD2, just like every good rule, has a geographical scope where it is actually applied. The first one is the two legs in transaction. The first leg is where the issuer is located, where is the issuer issue the card, and the first one is where the acquirer is located. If both of them are part of the EEA, European Economic Area, then you're in scope of PSD2. The second part is that PSD2 has actually type of transaction, despite the fact of being two legs in, are out of scope, so are not part of the mandate of PSD2. And those are Moto, by older telephone order. The second one is MIT, merchant-initiated transaction. And the third one is anonymous cards.
Şimdi burada dikkat ediyorsunuz, Evlat ile başlattı. PSD2'nin bu ödeme hizmetleri direktifinin kapsamına giriyor musunuz, girmiyor musunuz? Neredeyseniz girerseniz, neredeyseniz girmezseniz de başladı. Bunlar hani önemli şeyler. Çünkü finansal kuruluşlar bulunduğu oldukları bölgenin, dahil oldukları bölgenin düzenlemelerini uymakla mükellefler. Aksi takdirde cezai yaptırımlarla karşı karşıya. Bu yüzden bu çerçevenin bilinmesi önem arz ediyor. Şimdi devam edelim.
Also known as strong customer authentication is defined by two factors out of the three following. The first one is something that you are, which is your face, a fingerprint, for instance. The second one is something that you know. It can be a password, a passphrase. And the last one is something that you own. It's a phone, for instance. So if you have two factors out of three, how can you actually collect those? So you can collect those by multiple technological means. The first one is for card payment, 3 secure. It can be either 3DS1 or 3DS2. This you can also use local payment methods such as IT in Netherlands, so forth in Germany, or you can also use wallet type of payments such as Apple Pay, Google Pay, or Amazon Pay. If, as a merchant, you don't want to comply with the regulation to actually apply strong customer authentication on in-scope payments, then the issuing bank will actually refuse all your transactions. So, in other terms, you will not be able to accept payments within the European Union. So, from a merchant perspective, you will have to comply with the regulation, as we saw just before. And this means that you will have to offer the right version of 3DS applicable for a given transaction. So this means that if you are working with a partner that can see the full scope of the transaction, both from a 3DS perspective, but also from an authorization perspective, this decision can be more intelligent than if you're working in silo. The second one is working with a partner that is able and enabling you to offer a local parent method in order to comply with the regulation. So it can be offering ITIL like we mentioned before, but also offering BIPs in Norway, offering Soforts in Germany, etc., etc. And the last one is also offering wallet type of payments, such as Apple Pay, Google Pay, and Amazon Pay, that are by nature compliant with the regulation itself.
O böyle birinci kısmıydı bu işin. Yani ödeme hizmetleri direktifliği ilgili size temel bir tanıtımı yaptı. Bunlara neden uyman gerekiyor, uymazsan ne olur? Eğer sen kendin sağlayamıyorsan alternatif olarak ne yapabilirsin? Mutlaka uyman birileriyle çalışman gerekiyor. Bunları söyledi. Bazılarında da farklı otantikasyon yöntemleri üzerinde durdu. Bu önemli bir giriş. Çok hızlı, çok özet bir şekilde konunun çerçevesini çıkartıyor. Şimdi tabii biz bunu daha detaylarına bakacağız. Zaten komisyonda. Hani ardından da biraz daha detaylarla ilerleyeceğiz. Hadi bakalım şöyle bir sonraki kademeye geçelim. Burada bize Hitachi'den bir uygulama arayüzleriyle ilgili, PSD2 uyumla ilgili ve Postgres'de hakkında hani uyum için nasıl bir hazırlık yapıldığına dair bir bilgi var. Yani teknik olarak Avrupa'da bankaların özellikle 2018'e kadar bu açık bankacılık uygulama programlama arayüzlerine sahip olması gerekiyor. İşte burada bu sunulan beyaz tahta videosuyla da bize nasıl uyumlu olacağını, o süreçteki mevcut sistemlerin nasıl güven altına alacaklarını, bunlarla ilgili bir bilgilendirme yapıyorlar. Yani baktığımızda geçtiğimiz haftalarda biz açık bankacılık nedir gibi bir kavram üzerinde durmuştuk. Bunlarla ilgili konu bilgilerini sizlere vermiştik. Üzerinden belli başlı tartışmalar yapıldı, konuşuldu. Ders dışındaki zamanlarda ben de direkt bunu soran, etkileşimi geçen arkadaşlarımız da oldu. Hani bakıldığın zaman burada işte bizim için en temel şey CMA dediğimiz rekabetin başlandığı İngiltere tarafından ele alınan kısım. Ya bu tahtada teknik olarak bunlarla ilgili bir bilgi bize sunuyor. Ne yapılır? Geleneksel mimarilerin ölçeklendirilmesi üzerinde yapılar var. Çekirdek sistemlerin daha geliştirilmesi üzerinde yapılar var. Sene 2018'di bakın. O video eski bir video. Şu anda biz kaçtayız? 2025'e geldik artık. Aradan korkunç bir zaman geçti. Bu süre zarfında uyum sağlanırken, bu geçiş sağlanırken yaşanan şeyleri sizlerin de tecrübe etme imkanınız oldu. O dönemde yaşanan zorlukları, neler üzerinde konuşulduğunu duyarsanız, bundan sonraki olacak olası yollarla ilgili sizin bir fikriniz olur diye düşünüyorum. O yüzden bunu buraya alıp sizlerle paylaşmak ihtiyacım. Yine hemen ben bunu bu şekilde alt yazılarını çevireyim. Ana dile olacak. Tamamdır. Hadi bu başta şöyle yapalım.
Thanks for joining us. My name is Tony Reed from Hitachi Data Systems, and I'm CTO of our Financial Services Business Unit. And this afternoon, I want to talk to you about a hot topic in financial services, and that is open banking APIs. So let's start off by thinking about where these things have come from. And I guess there's two threads there, really. The first is in the UK market specifically. The Competition Markets Authority started a process a couple of years ago where they were investigating competition in retail. They produced their reports towards the end of last year and updated a number of requirements. But one of the key ones was to improve competition in retail banking. The traditional banks needed to offer the ability to expose their customer data to third parties that would deliver retail banking services to those customers. So that's the first thing. Second thing, along the same time, the European Commission started their second review of the Payment Services Directive. And again, lots of recommendations and requirements in that directive. But one of the key ones was to improve retail banking across all the banks in Europe. Those traditional banks needed to expose their customer data with customer consent, expose their customer data to third parties to deliver superior services. So when we talk to our existing banking customers, we talk to them about a number of different topics. And this prospect of open banking APIs falls into kind of four categories. So first is compliance. These are requirements from CMA and directives from the European Commission. Those need to be in place at the start of next year, so the banks have to comply to those requirements. Second is the customer experience. There's a real push at the moment in retail banking to deliver a new and improved customer experience, which probably hasn't changed very much over the last 10 years. So this offers the ability not only for the third parties that will exercise those APIs, but for the existing banks themselves to deliver a better customer experience. Third is competition. Obviously, the whole purpose of these open banking APIs is to allow other service providers to utilize the data through those APIs and deliver different set of services for those retail banking customers. And the fourth, that actually doesn't come up very often, but we think is really, really important, is the potential operational risk that building and exposing that API layers places on the traditional bank systems. And that's part of what we're going to talk about this afternoon. So let's think about that now. So thinking about our customers' existing core system, no bank today started life as they are now. All of the banks have built up over a number of many years from mergers and acquisitions. They've all delivered lots of different services over their existing core systems over the years, from mortgages to lending to insurance services and so on and so on. So those systems have become incredibly complex, interlinked, interjoined, and incredibly complex. They are quite traditional architectures, and they scale up. What I mean by that is, if they run out of bandwidth in these systems to deliver new services, then the way that they fix that is to install and implement a bigger piece of iron, a bigger system or a bigger storage device. And those things are capital intensive and take a long time to make productive. And then the third area is the way that these systems are managed and changed. Because they're so complex, the banks have to make sure that those systems are reliable and secure, and therefore they've wrapped a lot of very rigorous change control and change management processes in the systems. And often when we talk to the banks, it's very clear that any major change, which exposing these APIs certainly is a very major change, any major change kind of equates to risk, and that will worry the banks. So we kind of asked the question, given the attributes of your existing core systems, would you build an API layer on top of those systems and expose that data directly from the systems? And there's one other aspect that's probably worth thinking about here. The banks have a pretty good idea of how many transactions those core systems process. As soon as we open up that API, that becomes completely unpredictable. The amount of workload, the volume and shape of the transactions that those APIs generate is completely unpredictable. So there's another element of risk there that the banks need to worry about. So how could they address that then? Our view is that the likely approach is that they'll build what we might call a database extension or a caching layer. And as a customer consents and requires the bank to expose their data to third parties, then they will extract that data out of their existing core systems. They'll transform it in such a way that it will work in use of our file systems and databases, and then use that data to populate that database. And there's a number of benefits in doing that. One, they can pretty quickly meet the requirements of the PSD2 and the Competition and Markets Authority directives, and provide the requirements for those specific APIs. This will scale out, so as they add more customers to this process, then they can very easily provide scale. as they deliver those services. And probably more importantly, the banks will want to start to use that API process to add new services. And we could envisage that they will start to incorporate data from lots of different data sources. So as well as their traditional data, they'll be using things like geospatial data and weather data and social media data. So they can start to deliver a very rich set of services to their existing customers through these APIs and potentially monetize those new services and develop a new revenue stream. So how easy is it to do that then? All of the banks will have a number of tools that they use today to extract data out of systems and populate business information systems, data warehouse. And they would have been doing that for a number of years. But actually, extracting data from traditional systems and transforming it and blending it in such a way that you can use it in these new, very agile scale-out systems is actually a different process. And a lot of the traditional tools, although they've been very good at doing what they've been doing for the last 15 years, actually aren't particularly good at these new style transformation processes. And the speed at which they can do that is really, really important. Some of the tools that we have available to us through one of our software utilities called Pentaho is really expert at transforming those traditional sources into new style. And again, very importantly, being able to blend different data sources so that they can offer a richer set of services. So the bridge between these traditional systems and the new style systems is really, really important, and one that we think that we can offer another benefit to. So that's the way that we believe that customers will address this requirement. They need to support those APIs around about the start of next year, so they've not got too much time to get that done. And because that's just the cost to them right now, we do believe that very quickly the more forward-thinking banks will want to extend the capability of those APIs and develop that new stream and monetize. So we think this is a really exciting time, not only for the new fintech startups that are kind of very passionate about the new style service that they want to deliver and the customer experience that they want to deliver, but just as importantly, the traditional banks that have all of a sudden, through these new directives, have been given an opportunity to really deliver something new to their customers. So again, very exciting time. We're very interested in helping our existing customers go through this process. And if you'd like more information, we'd be delighted to be contacted. Thanks.
Devam oldu. Şu anda baktığınızda o dönemde geleceğin potansiyel bankacılık girişimi yönünde alınması gereken adımların ne olduğunu bir projeksiyon sunup ve onlara ne yönde hizmet sağlamaya yönelik bir bilgi yapmış olduk. Şimdi bundan sonraki kademimiz dijital operasyon dayanıklık yasası. Tabii oraya geçmeden önce şöyle bir şey yapacağız sizde. Burayla ilgili bir uygulama olayı döveceğiz beraber. Hani sizin bu ödeme hizmetleri direktifinden ne anladığınızı tematik olarak Türkiye'de bunun ne olduğunu ki zaten şu anda siz şeyi de görüyorsunuz. Bankalarda bu açık bankacılık uygulamalarını görüyorsunuz. Nasıl görüyorsunuz? Banka hesabınıza giriş yaptınız. Siz orada en temelde birçok banka artık arayüzünde şunu soruyor. Diğer bankalardaki hesaplarını tek bir arayüzden takip etmek ister misiniz diye. Tanık oldunuz mu buna? İşte tam olarak sistemimiz bu. Bu ne sağlayacak? Baktığınız zaman aslında bunun bir yerde toplanması, o sosyal medya hesaplarınızdan tutun da size ilgisi var yönetim bağlanmasına kadar diğer bankalardaki varlıklarınızın durumunuzun ortaya çıkarılmasıyla beraber sizin gerçek anlamda bir risk tespitiniz gerçekleştirebilir. Dağıtılmış sistemler arasında değil de aynı finansal sistemin içindeki birçok alandaki bulunan varlığınızı ve borçlarınızı hepsine değerli bir şekilde görebilmesine bankanın imkansız. Findex raporları vesaire var anlatılacak sizlerle ilgili kredibilite değerlendirmesi yapıldı. Bunu bir bütüncül olarak baktığınız zaman bankacılıktaki birim operasyon maliyetleri azaltılmış. Bu ne demek? Daha verimli bir bankacılık faaliyetinin sürdürülmesi. İşte bankalar bunlara para yatırdılar. Yatırdıkları paraların geri dönüşlerini beklediler. İşte bu müşterilerin fiyatlamaları yaparken bunlarla ilgili özel geliştirdikleri yazılımlarla gerektiği zamanlarda size robotik ödenmelerle Özellikle birçok banka bunu belli spesifik odak noktalar haline getirdi. Aşağıdaki kitleye yaymadan önce tepedeki nitelikli yatırımcılarıyla incelemeye çalıştılar. Onların üzerinde testini gerçekleştirdiler. Örneğin banka o dönemde kredi faizini önerirken size X puan üzerinden sunuyorsa sizin bu sisteme dahil olup risk değerlendirme sonucunda otomatik olarak sizde X eksi belli bir oran şeklinde veya riskli görüyorsa size X artı belli bir oran şeklinde otomatize edilmiş şekilde sunuyor. Sizin buna verdiğiniz tepkiyle sistemi tekrar geri besliyor. Dedi, evet buna cevap veriyor, cevap vermiyor. Çağrı hizmetleri destekleriyle, müşteri hizmetleri aramalarıyla size dönüş yaptı. Neden ondan kaçındığınızı kendi sistemleri düzeltmek üzere. Bu değerlendirme uzun hesabında hep yapıldı. Şimdi ne demek? Bir bankanın teknik olarak benimsediği yaklaşımı nerede tutarsanız tutun diyor. Buradaki kullandığı sistemlerle artık bankalar ne yaptılar? Açık bankacılığa yönelik uygulama arayüzlerini, o programları, API'leri aldılar, işin içine dahil ettiler ve size daha farklı bir bankacılık deneyimi sunmaya çalıştılar. Ki günümüzdeki projeksiyonu ben size geçtiğimiz haftaki dersimizde neobankalara doğru gittiğini söylemiştim. Tamamen hiçbir şubesi olmayan bankalara doğru. Buralarla ilgili zaten vakti geldiği zaman konuşmaları yapacağız. Sizin şu ödeme hizmetleri direktifinin ülkemizde olan yansımalarını ne olduğunu demek görüşlerinizi şimdi soracağım. Bir aramız var. Takriben işte dediğim gibi yarım saat kadar bir süre zarfımız var. Uygulamayı siz çözerken, değerlendirirken ondan sonra nefes alırsınız, soluklanırsınız. Peşinden tekrar buluşuruz. Şu anda kaydı durduruyorum. Slide'ı durduruyorum. Takriben buçukta beraber izleyelim o zaman. Tam buçuk olsun. Öyle çözelim. Hadi şimdi durdurdum. Kaydı da şöyle durdurayım. Evet, başlayalım şöyle tekrar.
Operational Resilience Act, that is DORA, to become fully applicable to financial institutions and IT service providers in the EU on January 17th of 2025. With just 1 month to go, the fintech sector is racing to ensure compliance. DORA aims to enhance cybersecurity and fraud prevention while bringing stability to the financial sector. Welcome to Bar India News Hour. Experts highlight that firms must address cyber risks such as legacy technology vulnerabilities, unauthorized access, and insider threats. Automation and centralized identity security are critical, with breaches costing an average of $6 million per incident. Despite the urgency, many financial institutions remain unprepared due to the budgets and staffing shortages. Experts suggest focusing on cybersecurity fundamentals like multi-factor authentication, firewalls, and network visibility, while integrating advanced tools like AI-powered threat intelligence for proactive defense is required. Other experts note that DORA consolidates many existing cybersecurity practices, urging firms to identify weaknesses, prepare management, and establish clear incident reporting and recovery processes. However, DORA has drawn criticism for its potential gaps and challenges. Additionally, regulations often lag behind technological advances, making it vital for businesses to view DORA as a framework to bolster broader strategic resilience rather than as a checklist. Research by Security Scorecard underscores the urgency of compliance, revealing that 98% of Europe's top companies experienced third-party breaches in the past year. Scandinavian countries ranked highest in cybersecurity readiness, while the energy sector showed significant vulnerabilities. Strengthening vendor accountability and leveraging cybersecurity rating could enhance supply chain resilience and mitigate risks. Experts stress that while DORA's January deadline is a milestone, it's not the finish line. Resilience must become an integral part of financial institutions' operations, requiring constant vigilance and collaboration across departments. The other subject matter experts highlight that smaller firms face significant challenges in meeting DORA's stringent requirements, necessitating strategic planning and ongoing compliance efforts. While outsourcing compliance can help smaller businesses, it comes at a cost. Ultimately, embedding resilience into organizational strategy will be essential for navigating the challenges and opportunities of a DORA-compliant future. Let's look into today's headlines. Meta is heavily fined for 2018 data breach impacting 29 million accounts. Meta Platforms has been fined 251 million euros, that is around $263 million for a 2018 data breach that impacted millions of users in the cloud. This is the latest financial hit the company has faced for flouting stringent privacy laws. The data breach is said to have impacted approximately 29 million Facebook accounts globally, of which approximately 3 million were based in the European Union and European Economic Area. The incident was disclosed back in September 2018. Apple winds down its efforts to offer iPhone via a monthly subscription model. Apple has reportedly put a stop on a project to build an iPhone hardware subscription service. The initial idea was to make owning an iPhone like subscribing to an app, with consumers paying monthly fees and getting new phones every year. But Apple recently scrapped the project, with the team disbanded and reassigned to other projects. The move is part of a broader shift in how Apple approaches payment services. The parliamentary panel pulls up IT Ministry for underutilizing semiconductor funds. A parliamentary panel on communications and IT has pulled up the committee for surrendering more than half the funds allocated for semiconductor and display manufacturing projects in 2023 to 24. The standing committee, in its fourth report, observed gradual decrease in allocation of funds from budget estimate 2021 to 22 to 2024 to 25 for Digital India program, as well as underutilization over the years. The total allocation of rupees 1,503.36 crore, the actual expenses as of March 31st of 2024 indicates that the ministry could spend only rupees 681.11 crore. Tata exploring deploying nuclear microreactors in US through its subsidiary. India's Tata Group is exploring to deploy up to 8 nuclear microreactors in the US through a group company. The subsidiary of Tata Chemicals North America, Tata Chemicals Soda Ash Partners, has signed a letter of intent with BWXT Advanced Technologies to explore the deployment of up to 8 nuclear microreactors. Tata Chemicals North America is a subsidiary of Tata Chemicals Limited. With its LOI, both the companies agreed to expand their collaboration.
Burada dikkat ediyorsanız size her seferinde dünyanın farklı yerlerinden alıp bu konuyla ilgili belirli başlı çarpıcı haberlere düşmüş bilgileri veriyor aktar. Yani bu konu neden önemli? Dijital operasyonlarda dayanıklılık neden önemli ve bu yazanın aşılması ile ilgili engeller, sorunlar neler olabiliyor? Buralarla ilgili toparlama yapmaya çalışıyor.
NVIDIA unveils its most affordable generative AI supercomputer. NVIDIA has unveiled its most affordable generative AI supercomputer called Jetson Orion Nano Super Developer Kit. Priced at approximately $21,146, this tiny AI accelerator offers up to 67 trillion operations per second, that is TOPS, TOPS, of AI performance, which is more than that of most AI PCs priced over $1,000. It is currently available for students, enthusiasts, and developers across the world. The Jetson Orion Nano Super was first announced in 2023 for $499, but now NVIDIA has slashed its price. That's all for now. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe to War India magazine. You can download the War India from Google Play Store and Apple App Store for more news and updates. Stay tuned. Thank you. The EU bit.
Burada uzun bir tartışma kısmı geliyor şu dolarla ilgili. Yani bilmeniz gereken temel yapıyla ilgili alıp bu konuyla ilgili bu işin en başında gelenlerden bir değerlendirme kısmında. Burası uzun ve yorucu bir sezon. O yüzden hani bu birazcık şey, eş anlık olarak ekranlarınızdan attığınız vesaire attığınız daha faydalı olacak. Çünkü hani kopabiliyorsunuz, kopmamanız lazım. Üzerinde dikkat ediyorsanız en başta öyle bir tavsiyelerin olması, ilk başta da olması lazım. Yani size direkt gelmiyor. Dikkat ediyorsanız hani reaktif olarak ilerlediğinizi söylüyorsunuz. Bir şeyler, teknolojik ilerlemeler gerçekleşiyor. Yasalar, uyumlar, bunlarla ilgili bunların peşi sıra gidiyor. Ve işte bunların o düzenlemeler yapılabilmesi için de arka tarafta uzmanlar neler konuşuyor, sektörden kimleri etkiliyor, nasıl sonuçlar doğuruyor, bunlarla ilgili tartışmaların takip edilmesi gerekiyor. Yani size burada o bakışı kazandırmaya çalışıyoruz. Biraz öncü bir şey gibi gözükecek ama hani bakıyorsanız CEO'lar var teknik yapıdan ve RSA de bu işin içinde önemli bir şey. Dijital danışmanlık sağlayan kişilerden tutun siber bilgileri yapılara kadar herkes bu işin içinde. Haydi bakalım başlayalım değerlendirmesi dinlemeye. Önemli bir şey. Tabii. Altınız desteğiyle aktif geçiyorum tekrar.
Hayır.
İhtiyacınız olur vesaire uzun bir soluklu kısa olacağı için hani telefonlarınızdan veya tabletlerinizden artık dijital ortamınızda bağlı kalmanız hani o anda sizin için faydalı. İhtiyacınız göre kendinizi şekillendirirsiniz. Doğru. Tamam.
My name is Ikhal Premature. I head the primary markets in Israel for the London Stock Exchange. Today, we are going to talk about digital operation and resilience acts, or as everyone refers to it, the total regulations. We will talk about what you need to know, and why is it relevant to you, and of course, the implications of compliance. Before we start, I'd just like to say that this session is being recorded, and anyone who wants to revisit content or share with any of the colleagues can do so by visiting the Spark, where this webinar will be the video on time going forward. This is designed to be an interactive session, so we do encourage you to ask questions using the functionality built into the platform. You will see the Ask the Question option below the video player on your screen. The question will come to me, and I will present it to the panel during the Q&A question section at the end. So to dive into this fascinating topic in more detail, I'm delighted to be joined this afternoon by a panel of experts who I will hand over to introduce themselves in turn. So Ian, let's start with you.
Thank you, Michael. Hi, everyone. My name is Ian McCaw. I'm the Managing Director here at AO1, and I head up our transaction advisory services business across EMEA. I have a long history working around cybersecurity and resilience, particularly in some of the larger financial institutions, and have been through, I guess, kind of personal experiences as it relates to consultants like cyber and resilience. So, yeah, look forward to the conversation. Maybe you can hand over to Colin.
You are on mute. Okay.
Sorry, I said thank you, Ian. I'm Kobe Friedman. I'm the founder and CEO of Findings. We're a SaaS company which is providing solutions for automating supply chain compliance in cybersecurity, sustainability, and resiliency space, and looking forward to share some knowledge.
Great, Simon?
Thanks, Michael. Hello, everyone. So I'm Simon Rycroft. I'm CEO at Cyber Risk Management Group. We specialize in helping clients, large and small, really cut through the noise when it comes to implementing pragmatic approaches to IT and cybersecurity governance, risk and compliance. And I'm really looking forward to the chat.
Thank you so much. This is very interesting, especially because it's so imminent, right? So let's get into the first question. My first question is, can you please, and I'll start with Simon first. Can you please explain what the DORA regulations are and its implications?
Yeah, sure, Michael. So let's start with the other side view. So DORA is a wide-reaching piece of EU legislation, that's key, it's from EU. It's aimed at ensuring that the financial system in its widest sense has the built-in resilience it needs to withstand any significant, largely technology-related disruption to its operations. At a big picture, to my mind, two key things to be aware of. It's really wide in terms of the types of organisation that are in scope of DORA compliance. So organisations that may well have quite immature approaches to tech and security governance, risk and compliance may well go in scope in a way they never have before. So that's number one. And number two, at a general level, DORA uses language that looks very prescriptive, but actually is inherently subjective and quite vague actually in places. You could just look at Article 7 if you need evidence in it, not right now, do it afterwards. But that vagueness is down to something called the proportionality principle, which is riddled throughout DORA. Essentially, that means you shape how you comply with DORA based on your size, your scale, your operation types and complexity, your risk profile. That all shapes how you comply with DORA. It can be a bit of a get out for some smaller organisations, larger organisations, not so much, but those are two really key points I think to understand about DORA.
Bu arada şunu söylemem lazım size. Şimdi şu anda bakıyor olduğunuz şey o kadar güncel bir şey ki. Hani bir aylık bir süre zaten düşünün şu anda implementasyonda. 12 Ocak'ta bu olay yürürlüğe 2023'te konuşulan bir şey. Şu anda bu senenin içinde Ocak ayının ortasında uygulamaya alınacak. Ve geçen süre zarfında işte bir aylık bir süre zarfı var. Yani şu anda en güncel şeyi öğreniyoruz. Yani bundan daha güncel bir şey yok. Birebir anın içindesiniz. Sizi ilerleyen zamanda çok etkileyecekmiş. O yüzden hani bakın burada bir sürü şeye etkiliyor. Telefonlarınızdan yaptığınız işlemlerden tutun da müşteri tanımı ilkesinin farklı bir şekilde işlemesine kadar dijital oturumlardan, katkılarınızdan tutun da bunlarla ilgili finansal kuruluşun alması gereken tedbirlere kadar geniş bir çerçevesi var. O yüzden hani geleceği öğreniyorsunuz şu an. Günümüzün nasıl şekillendi ve geleceği nasıl görmeyeceğini.
To add to this one, maybe financial expertise.
Yeah, I mean, I think the global financial sector is one of the most important sectors in terms of our day-to-day lives and being able to make payments and being able to look after, to get to transport and to look after our families and so forth. So the rise of the payment system and our financial institutions is key. We've obviously been through financial crisis in the past, and we've seen what happens when the trust in the financial system is less there. So this whole regulation is about improving the consumer confidence and trust in the financial system, but also recognising that things like digital resilience is going to be more key. There's clearly the various actors out there that are proceeding to compromise businesses. The complexity of our digital environment that we built is hugely complex now. The extent of the internet and the way the cloud services work and ICT providers work. So it is a complex web of digital services that need to seamlessly work together to provide a resilient platform. And do is all about recognising the finance institutions is part of that. There's some other critical ICT providers, cloud providers, technology providers that that form part of that ecosystem. And as Simon said, the large financial institutions, this should be nothing new for them. But actually, as you go down the ecosystem, then it becomes a little bit more complex, and there's a whole new. I think what's unique about the DORA is there's a whole new extent of companies that fall into the vacuum of DORA and has to be compliant.
Yes, so we have, for example, payment company, and I'm sure a lot of fintech, smaller fintech companies might be caught by that, and they would be surprised. I hope not, but let's hope they all know about DORA by now. Is there anything you want to add to this, Kobe? Do you have anything to add on this, or should we move to
Yes,
this?
maybe just to give some perspective regarding the cybersecurity background of DORA. Basically, the DORA is, I think, part of a family of regulations all over the world, which is basically rising around the resiliency and the cybersecurity and the assurance around supply chains, also in the defense sector, in the critical infrastructure sector, and in others. When you look on the relationship between enterprises and in this context of this discussion, financial institutions, payments, hedge funds, broker-dealer, all the ecosystem, there is more and more dependencies of those entities in others outside of their premises. Connections, payments, APIs, data processing, and so on and so forth. And basically, that became a really weak spot of the ecosystem. Cybersecurity-wise, supply chain became one of the most attacked vectors of the industry. That created a situation in which companies are being hacked, compromised, being unstable because of this risk. And regulation is following that risk, aiming to deal with that. And it's true, as Ian mentioned, that big guys are being there forever in terms of third-party risk, but the importance is to understand the trends around those regulations. DORA is one of them. One is way more scale. Companies need to scale their oversight dramatically compared to what they're used to. The other one is around like vertical exposure, the ability to understand the chain itself and not only just check out the immediate connections. And the third one is to move the needle from periodic assessments and audits towards continuous monitoring, which is part of the requirements. And that sums up to way more scale, much more friction on the company, and in that regard, all of us need to be prepared.
Thank you very much. So the obvious question, the first obvious question is, so what will the DORA regulation affect? I would start with Simon here, and then we'll move to Ian, and if he probably wants to say anything about that.
Sure, thanks, Michal. So if we look at it in its simplest, there are three types of organisation, to my mind, that are impacted by DORA. So firstly, we're going to keep talking about financial entities. This is a specific type of organisation that's subject to the regulation. So we're talking about financial entities with a presence in the EU. I think we'll talk about the UK dimension shortly. The definition of a financial entity is really broad. It encompasses the types of organisation that financial regulators haven't really focused on that much to date. So obviously it includes, the usual suspects, banks, credit institutions, insurers, but it also includes entities that haven't faced a lot of scrutiny: crowdfunding service providers, crypto asset service providers, data reporting service providers. So it really does engulf this entire wider financial ecosystem to Kobe's point, with this interconnected nature of the way in which this world now works is front and centre in DORA. That brings us to the second category then of organisations that really need to be taking notice. And this is ICT, that's information communication technology, third-party providers. So this is the organisations that are delivering mainly IT-focused services to those financial entities in support of their end clients. That's number two. Number three is a subset of the second rule. And these are designated critical ICT third-party providers. And they are designated critical because they are structurally significant to the financial system. And that's a determination made by the European supervisory authorities, that designation critical. It's a process that will be going through the first half of this year to arrive at that designation. So if you are fortunate enough, being a little bit glib there, to be designated as a critical third party, you're going to be subjected to direct oversight by what's called the lead overseer for your designated for your organisation under one of the European supervisory authorities. They have the power to impose fines of 1% of average daily turnover for non-compliance. So in broad terms, those are the three categories of organisation that really need to be taken notice.
And you mentioned there EU presence. So essentially, these regulations don't only apply to EU member companies incorporated in those EU member states. So they have some sort of presence in the EU, or as you said, they are providing critical third-party providers, basically. Then they will also be.
Yes, absolutely. There's an important thing to understand. I mean, it's such an interconnected nature of our world in the UK. Again, it's systemically connected with, for better or for worse, given the events of the last 7 years or so, we are still highly connected with Europe. And organisations that are not necessarily have their formal base in the in the EU. So this is third-party service providers may not have their base in the EU, but they come in within scope. They will still need to be included in reporting through to what we call the competent authorities.
So Ian, would you tell us, because we have a lot of companies from the UK, which is not an EU member state, and regardless of what you think about Brexit, this is the situation now. So how will the UK entities be impacted?
Yeah, it's a good question. The reality is that any UK financial institution with a EU presence, as you've already said, will be fall into the Dover regulation as well. So whether it's a bank or insurer or any financial company will fall into this regulation. Now, the good news is that the UK also has similar standards as EU Dover. They're slightly different in terms of scope and nature, but there is the Bank of England's FCA's operational resilience framework, which actually looks at operational resilience in its broadest sense. It's not just a digital resilience act, it's actually a broad business resilience act. So we look at other risks, if there's a pandemic or flood or other types of business risks that can occur. The Bank of England also has CBET testing in place. So again, another requirements to CBET is the bank's security testing regime for any sizable financial institution that requires regular security testing, and that's something that actually Aon does as a firm, and so we've got many colleagues who do that type of thing for financial institutions. And then there's an aspect of the supply chain, and again, the FCA has a third-party regime that they have in place for assessing third-party companies. Now, the difference with banking, those are financial regulations. They don't necessarily link things to, for example, if you're an ICT provider in the UK, that won't necessarily apply to you. Now, if you're an ICT provider in the UK and you're servicing an EU member state financial institution and you're deemed as a critical third party, then you won't be required to be DORA compliant following 17th January. So it's, there's some nuances in there, there's some similarities and some parallels. But actually, I think for each company, they really need to kind of get in and understand, for you as a business, where are you on that level of compliance and relevance for DORA? But for sure, UK companies can definitely fall into this spectrum.
And I suppose a lot of UK payment providers and financial institutions actually have presence in the EU as well. I don't know, don't. So essentially, you would be caught if you are in an international company, whether you are in the UK or EU. So we really need to find out. Kobe, did you want to add anything to this, or should we?
Just to contextualize, in the audience here, there might be like financials and there might be ICPs, and we need to remember that both of those need to be prepared. The good news, I think, is that even though the jurisdiction, the accountability, the liability issues, supervision is very dramatic in that regard, there is not really something very new in terms of what needs to be done. We will speak about it later. Those are practices that have been here for many years. A lot of the ICTs were not subjected to processes that were not preparing well because they were not requested by their customers, and that's going to be changing. So in that regard, there are practices to be embraced, and it's a process that can be done fairly easily, and we need to just set up the process in order to do so well.
Thank you very much, Kobe. So obviously, we see how wide-reaching these regulations are. When will the regulation be enforced, and where do organizations need to be in terms of compliance by January 17th? Because obviously that's the key day in this time.
Yeah, that is a kind of drop dead date where we need to be. Frankly, we already need to be compliant. Actually, the requirement to be compliant with DORA was actually 2 years ago, which is when it came into force. But now the difference is it's enforceable, meaning you can be audited and potentially fined for non-compliance. And certainly, if you had a breach or something like that in the financial services business or one of the direct ICT providers at this stage, you can expect that the regulator, EU regulator of that country is likely to come after you for the types of penalties that that are Canadian penalties in place for complying. That, but this is when you need to be ready. And so, what do you really need to have in place by January 17th? Well, there's actually probably it's having your good governance in place around DORA, being able to have proven that you perform a risk assessment around DORA, that you have the plan in place for achieving DORA requirements. You will need to evidence things like having a security testing that has been performed. You would certainly, there's some practical things that anybody wouldn't be got the DORA requirements, but I would start to say you need to have evidence to your security testing. You probably need to have reviewed and at least dusted down your incident response plan and actually show that that's there and ready. You certainly will have to have, if you're a global financial institution, you will be doing this already. But if you're slightly further down the pecking order of financial institutions, you should certainly have reviewed your third-party supply chain. And if you're a third-party supplier already and you've been tapped on the shoulder as being DORA, following the scope of DORA, then you will need to have got all of this in place. One of the key things for January 17th is actually having the kind of register of interest. So that is literally your a documented view of your third-party supply chain, which ones are critical providers, etc. That register needs to be shared and it's available to the regulator of the EU and their member state where you're registered. So that needs to be shared. And what the EU is going to use that for is actually to aggregate all of those registries of interest so that they can then figure out who are the critical providers across all of the EU financial institutions and make sure that appropriate controls are in place and so forth. There are some interesting things that we think are coming down the line, which for sure later. But fundamentally, getting that registry of interest in place by the 17th, and there's other things I mentioned are key.
Okay, that's great. Simon, did you want to add? Robbie, did you want to add to this?
Yeah, I suppose it's that sort of real world view, because everything that Ian says there is absolutely right. You've still got to be compliant now, it's enforceable this week. The reality, of course, is that the regulators, the supervisory authorities, there's an element to which the wings are still being built as we're all going down, collectively down the runway. We saw even towards the end of last year, the ESAs, the European Supervisory Authority, they ran a dry run exercise for the register of information process that Ian's just been talking about, with a selected number of entities from a small number of European states. That in itself then resulted in a disagreement, a little micro spat, if you like, between the ESAs and the EU Commission about the type of identifier that third parties needed to have and to be included on the register, what we call an identity identifier, ADI, and there's a whole disagreement about that. Now, the significance of that is not the detail of that disagreement. It's the fact that those conversations are still happening so late in the day. This process Ian is talking about to aggregate information about the third parties that financial entities are using, with a focus on those that are critical, and then aggregating that up to European level, and then that designation of which are critical. There's going to be a big focus on that specific process over the coming months. That's where the real attention, I think, will be going immediately. I think in reality, what it means is that there's a micro breathing space within which, as organisations, we can focus on those core disciplines that Ian talked about, identifying your critical processes, the assets that support those, your risk management approach, business continuity, incident management, all of that stuff. Get on it now, because you've got a tiny bit of breathing time, but not a lot.
Yeah.
If I may add to that again, third-party risk practices have been here forever. So the main thing is that even though the 17th is like in ways, I'm in New York, so I bought myself another half a day. So, but still, it's a very short period of time. So let's leave that aside as the date. I think the key term is to have a due process and to have a supply chain program. If you already have a program, you need to examine it and maybe to extend it, most probably to extend it beyond like the traditional, let's do an assessment every 2 years of what we think is our critical vendors, and we're done with it. No, it's supposed to be an entire program, starting with inherent risk modeling to be able to recognize who are the critical vendors, what are the reasons, how do you rank them, how do you prioritize them, how do you address them, and then to assess them well enough. And I must say in that regard that the industry nowadays is not well developed. It's not providing good enough assessments and audits for an entire range of 10,000 vendors for a bank, for example. That needs to be way better. The third one is around the continuous monitoring program, which basically takes the touch points in like 100x's in terms of the potential issues that needs to be handled and what can we do around that. Evidence, as Ian mentioned, and then in the end, which is very important, mentioning the regulation disclosure program. So most of the large enterprises has in their ELAs a vendor disclosure on breach and all kinds of clauses dealing with that. But it doesn't mean that the ICPs are standing in those requirements. It doesn't mean that the customers themselves, the enterprises, are enforcing that. And now you have liability for that. So an entire process should be set around that. Taking that to the smaller participants, the smaller financials, most probably they don't have the process in place. So in that regard, they need to move fast. And as Simon says, to embrace or to at least kickstart a supply chain program to be initiated immediately in order to be prepared in like 3 months or so.
Thank you. That brings me to another question, obviously. So you're talking about what needs to be done. And of course, the larger institution, the larger companies already have plans, I would say, or something in place, and they need to dust it up. And those little ones need to create a new program, as you said. So we don't have much time, we all know that already, so without freaking everyone out, having technologies be utilized to enhance the compliance process and also to help with this extreme puzzling situation. Do we need to start with Bobby? Because you were the last to speak.
Yeah, sure. So basically, my always give the same answer. You need to buy my products. But besides that, putting joke aside, the entire process or the requirements is sort of a very complex puzzle that you need to build in order to understand an engagement risk. What's the engagement between a financial and its ICT or critical ICT? It's a combination of pieces of a puzzle. You need to scan them, to pen test them, to assess them, to audit, to verify, to continuously monitor, to check their cloud posture, if which is becoming a huge thing, to do that on a continuous basis, to have a disclosure program. And if you have 500 vendors or 5,000 vendors, that's building a picture out of a puzzle 500 times. So in that regard, this is where technology comes into place. It's about embracing standards. I would always advise not to reinvent the wheel. I think there are good frameworks out there. The regulation itself leaves a lot of room to embrace different things and to adjust them. There is the ability to contextualize the frameworks to your own needs, the ability to set up a digital process. And in the end, only then you can buy my products. But besides that, I think there are very good technologies available, and depending on the case, their solution is there, and you can orchestrate something pretty good.
Thank you. Simon?
I think I might be able to help you a bit before Ryan covers products, but to my mind, the role of technology in supporting this, there are broadly two categories of technology. You've got tech that supports and makes efficient the process of compliance itself. So I'm talking about GRC platforms, I'm talking about harmonization and control frameworks, about management of compliance attestations, about gap assessments, about audit support, about remediation tracking, compliance status dashboards, all that kind of stuff. And for full disclosure, I live a lot in that world with our great partners at Diligent. There are, of course, other GRC platforms available. The second category of technology is really about the substance that DORA is driving at. So it's about risk assessment, asset registers, capacity management. It's about event logging, vulnerability and patch management. It's about privileged access management, DLP technologies, a security instance of event management technologies, third-party assurance, of course, what Kobe is specializing in here. This is about efficient, effective, consistent value for money use of tooling to support IT and security operations programs. It all happens to support DORA compliance. There is a nirvana zone, in my view, which is that those when the two categories of technology talk to each other. And it genuinely, I think, is a bit of a nirvana zone. One word of caution I would suggest about technology in the context of compliance, and that's about transparency. Understand exactly what your tech is doing so that you are in a position to explain its role to anyone that applies scrutiny. Because black boxes in the context of risk management and compliance really aren't helpful. That's a bit of a bugbear of mine, but that's mine.
Thank you very much. Ian, do you have anything to add?
Just briefly, obviously we talked a lot about technology there. I think that's, tech is really important in this to enable and protect the business. Two brief reflections. One is that it's, tech's important, but actually so is financial risk. We'll talk about financial quant a bit, but insurance is a big part of protecting against financial loss. About not just tech, but your capital at risk, your on balance sheet, and also this compliance regime is in place. And then we should turn it upside down a little bit. The compliance is there to measure and monitor to make sure that it meets a certain standard. But actually, all the things that Dora is talking about are actually really just common sense.
Durduruyorum, bir şey söyleyeceğim size. Şimdi baktığınız bunlarla ilgili bir sürü sorular var. Sektör işte uzmanlaşan kişiler de hani burada bazı şeylere takıldığı zaman soru cevap kısımlarına girebilirler. Yani şu sırayı kapsıyor mu? Mevzuat bir sonuçta. Baktığınızda size finansal işlemlerin ana çerçevesinin hukuk metinlerini okumak ve bunu uygulamaktan ibaret olduğunu hep anlatmaya çalışıyorum. Hani eğer yasalara uyum sağlayabiliyorsanız, onları takip etmeyi başarabiliyorsanız o zaman siz bu işi tamam, doğru ve tam bir şekilde yapıyorsunuz. Burayla ilgili de bu şeffaflık adına şöyle bir gerçekleşme var. Bunu da şimdi hemen bir ekran paylaşımını yapıp sağlamaya çalışıyorum ama geldi. Bakın burası bu yasal malzeme eşitli olan kısmımız. Buradan filtrasyonu yaptığımda ben veri setinde direkt Dora'yı seçersem sizi ilgilendirecek şeyler. Bunlarla ilgili hangi başlık altında neler geldi, neler oldu bir dünya şeyi. Bazı son halde bazı sorunun cevaplanmasının reddedildiğine yönelik bilgiler getiriyor bakın şurada. Ve bunlarla ilgili de gene açıklamaları linkler boyunca yapıyor. Bu sayfaları takip edebilme başarısını kazanmanız lazım. Hani olayların birileri yorumlarını yapıyor, siz de paylaşıyor, fikir sahibi oluyorsunuz, tamam doğru ama bizim bu dersimiz içerisinde sizin suyun kaynağına gidebilir hale gelmeniz lazım. Bunlar sayesinde siz şey yapacaksınız. Yani çünkü duydunuz, ESMA'yı işittiniz, wk4 duydunuz, Avrupa'yı duydunuz. Bunların hepsi geçtiğimiz dönemle beraber bu dönem içerisinde kademe kademe üst üste konulan şeyler. Yani bunlar ne iş yapıyor, hakim olduğunuz zaman artık hani neyi nereden takip ettiğinize dair bir şeyler bakacaksınız. Sen ICT olmasan da hani bunlarla ilgili ufak tefek takip edilme kapasitesine erişmem lazım. Hani böyle kapatacağım sadece tekrardan. Öbür tarafa döndüreceğim. Şöyle. Geldi mi? Geldi. Paylaşım doğru mu? Doğru. Yaklaşık bir 25 dakika kadar kısımlar kaldı bunun. Ondan sonra bak öğrenmeye gideceğiz. Ama ondan önce.
Should be doing the same thing. And so it's really just sort of a form language and framework for agreeing which companies meet the standards agreed by the EU, but any business should really be in this and doing far more on this topic, particularly if you're in tech and you're in finance, stay ahead. And we'll come on to the M&A impact because it actually comes back to value. But we'll come on to that this.
If I did something to that, just to give a bit of context regarding the magnitude of the problem. On average, every assessment, every audit being done, generating about 15 to 20 gaps in different severity, of which about a third are considered severe by our customer definition. That means that if you take a big bank or a mid-sized bank that might have at least a few hundreds of vendors, or a large one which might have a few thousands, from that, let's take about 20% will be considered critical or meaningful. That might mean tens of thousands of issues that needs to be monitored and optimized. In that regard, there are evolving solutions that utilize or leverage AI capabilities in order to optimize your efforts. That's a lot of FTE potentially if it's being done by old school. And that's another thing that technology work needs to be considered.
Yeah, very good point. So we talked about enhancing compliance processes, but how innovative approaches to bolster cyber resilience in the face of this growing digital threats that we hear about every single month, unfortunately. Should we start with Ian?
Sure. I think there is a really pragmatic way to approach this. So in functional complexity of cybersecurity, cyber attackers, and some of the tools and tech that has been talked about, Ultimately, most at risk is, particularly for financial institutions or supply chain, is financial impact. What is the financial impact of your business? And so, one of the things that I would certainly recommend is a good way to look at this is that is to really bring together cybersecurity with your executive team and your board and etc. in order to integrate this. You can talk about tech kind of level. It's not just going to understand it to the level of degree. We find that's a very complex landscape. But actually, to talk about financial impact, and to do that, you can do things like cyber risk quantification, which look at your business and break down the key business processes and look at, for example, your payment system or your KYC process or your backup solution, for example, and say what happens if that was either taken out for hours or days, or what happens if a data breach happened or ransomware happened at the level or in a particular part of your third-party supply chain, and to risk quantify financial impact, because what that does is it gives you a natural view in terms of the context of what is important in your business. Because actually, Colby mentioned the vast complexity of global financial institutions will have hundreds and thousands of providers. Well, not all of them are critical. There's only going to be, I'll start saying that, going to be big focus ones to do a cyber risk quantification exercise, which draw out which ones are most critical, or to understand your application stack, which is the most critical part of components. It's not just about applications and tech, it's about people as well. You start to look at people, applications or sites, all that needs to come together to actually understand financial impact. And so, when it comes to investment and prioritizing the amount of spend and prioritizing the amount of effort, taking a financial quant view of this really brings together and brings the executives into place. They're making decisions of it. It's not just purely the cybersecurity team.
Thank you. Kobe, do you want to mention something here?
I would just mention a trend that we observe in the few industries, including the banking sector here in the US, which is moving to the next level in terms of sort of information sharing. At the end of the day, an ICT, definitely a critical one, most probably serves more than one customer. And the situation of the world is that every customer conducts their own process, which is basically checking more or less the same things, only in a bit different context. Part of the evolving trends is to be able to sort of have a single, unified, and continuously monitored evidence posture of this ICT, of this vendor, and be able to syndicate the data from that and contextualize that to different business engagements in order to save time, effort, and be able to scale on both sides. This is something that was tried before, and not always successfully, but in the case where everything is moving towards very, very large scale of requirements is just necessary. So one of the approaches is a utility-based approach towards monitoring vendor posture, definitely in the cloud environments and software environments. And this is something that every customer, every financial should consider when embracing a new technology. Definitely in a situation where you want to ramp up fast, there is no need to reinvent it.
No need to reinvent the wheel. I think that would be our key phrase here, because the people might be sure that actually a lot of the stuff is common sense. A lot of the stuff is already being practiced in most payment and financial and cyber institutions. Risk assessment and planning is not something new, like out of the blue. So it's just need to be adjusted a little. So let's talk practical here. Can you please share some practical strategies and experiences for our audience to implement the DORA regulations? We start with Simon. It was very
Sure, Michael, I've just got a comment to make about the topic of risk. Scenarios, having the business engaged is really important when we are trying to understand potential impact, and we need to understand business impact as a prerequisite to its concept of criticality. So scenarios and workshopping with the business around those scenarios can be really powerful. Just a second point on the mechanics of risk quantification, it can get very sophisticated. It can involve Monte Carlo techniques, it can involve lots of stuff like granular understanding of annual loss expectancy. A lot of larger organisations are well placed to undertake that sort of activity. Smaller organisations tend not to be so well placed to incorporate those sorts of techniques when understanding risk. So the key thing to my mind about risk and quantification is to have something that's consistent, that's credible, that has integrity, that has defensibility. Because the word accuracy in the context of risk is not an easy word to use, because if you're that confident in accuracy, then we probably shouldn't use the word risk. That's just a comment on that previous conversation. In terms of strategies for compliance, it depends who you are. If you're large, if you're from a regulated, a heavily regulated industry sector already, we've said this already, you're likely to be pretty well placed. So if you are a large financial institution, if you've got a relatively mature GRC function, I'd be focusing on a couple of things right now. I'd be focusing on the specifics of DORA compliance, mapping the requirements to your existing control frameworks, identifying specific gaps. Those are likely to include DORA-specific reporting requirements, like the requirement to report major incidents, and to triage an incident to determine whether it is major based on predefined thresholds. But it's also, as we've already said, I think the thing for large organisations, because the sheer scale of the supply base of many organisations, to Kobe's point, put a big spotlight on your portfolio of third parties, identify those that are critical. You'll likely have done that through some sort of triaging in your supplier assurance process, and review standard contractual terms for DORA compliance, and implement dialogue with those suppliers of ICT services that you reckon are most critical. So that's for larger organisations. If you're less mature, I think you've got to take a bit more of a bird's eye view and come at it from a little more holistic, if you like, level to start with. So first, make sure that your governance layer, your management body is up to speed with the requirements for DORA compliance in the first place. I've seen too many organisations take a bottom-up approach to compliance, and that tends not to tend to end well, let's just say that. So similarly, start preparing procurement and legal about the fact that you're going to need to coordinate closely on supplier and third-party management in the context of DORA. Get to grips with the core disciplines that DORA really requires, identifying your critical processes and information assets, having a consistent approach to understanding risk and assessing risk. Keep it simple to start with, revisiting your end-to-end incident management process, reviewing your business continuity and testing arrangements, disaster recovery and crisis management. Obviously taking a really close look at how you're managing third parties. And then once you've done that, make sure you've got a broad level of good practices in place. You can start dripping down into refinements. But if you're fairly mature in your current approach, and you're not using regulatory scrutiny, in my experience, going through a regulatory sort of audit environment supply process, then the regulator is going to be looking for broad adherence, and that you're on a mature integrated journey to improvement, and being able to evidence where you are, where you're going, what you're going to do to get to that next stage of maturity is really important. Tracking all of that and recording decisions you're making, the actions you're taking, super important. There's way more I can say on this, but I suggest we should give the other guys a chance to talk.
Olay şuradan başlıyor. Normalde bütün temanın döndüğü nokta aslında kişisel verilerin güvenliğinin sağlanması, gerçekleştirilen işlemlerde taraflar arasında doğrulamanın sağlanması. Hani en basit şeyin düşün, bir finansal kuruluşun neden siz kullanıyorsunuz? Bazı kolaylaştırıcı işlemleri sağlıyor olduğu için. Nerede? Fonların taraflar arasında transferinde. O aracı kurduğu şu veya o finansal sistemdeki bankayı her neyse ya da ödeme sağlayıcısı vesaire kullanmanın teması şu, sen buna güven duyuyorsun. Ona bir Güven olmazsa paranın oradan akmasına izin verir misin? Veya işlemlerin oraya doğru bilgilerin akmasına vermez. Şimdi burada yapılmaya çalışan şey bütün bu sürecin güven altında tesis edilmesi. Ve hani eğer bir firma bizim de hani Türk kanunlarında bir basiretli tacirli davranmak dediğimiz kavram var ya, hani o işi yapıyorsa o işin hakkını vermez. Hakkını vermesi gereken noktalardan bahsediyor. Oradaki unuttuklarda nelere dikkat etmesi lazım, ne yapması lazım. Yani dijital çağda, finansta fonların artık eski usulü olduğu gibi Trump ekonomisinde oluyor. Yani ben buğdayını getireyim, buğdaya buna bakayım, niteliği, özelliği birebir tutuyor mu? Eğer bu tutuyorsa bunun karşında diğer malzeme takası sağlayayım dediğimiz ortamın dışındayız. Diyor ki tamamen dijitalindesin sen bu işin. Dijitaldeysen de bu işi doğrulamak, o kişinin hesabına gerçekten bu para var mı? Bu parayı aktarırken yasal yollardan mı aktardı? Gelen şey benim tarafıma doğru şekilde aktarılacak mı? Eşleştirmeler, kimliklerin denetimi vesaire sağlanacak mı? Biraz sonra geçtiğimiz o kara para aklanması yasasında haksız bir noktada mı? Bunların hepsinin şüphenin ortadan kaldırılması lazım. Bunu yaptığında ana yolu yasal düzenlemelerle ben bu insanları sistemin içinde yer alan bireyleri koruyucu bir yapıya inşa ediyorum. Bunu yaparken de birebir bu işe uyum sağlayacak kuruluşların bu işe adapte olması lazım. Risk unsuru teşkil edecek tarafları belirleyebilecek kapasitede olması gerekiyor. Bu riskli işlemleri tespit edip onlarla bir düzeltici veya önleyici eylemleri yapabiliyor olması lazım. İşte bu yüzden orayla ilgili alınması gereken bütün detaylar bu dijital operasyonlarda kırılganlıkların azaltılmasına yönelik olan yapıların tesisiyle ilgili tartışılır. Yani uygulamaya da başladım. Evet başladı. Bu işin sonunun nereye gidebileceğini bakın şöyle hayal etmeniz açısından sonra. Biz hep merkeziyetsiz finanstan bahsediyoruz. Decentralized finance dediğimiz DeFi. Burada ne var? Artık sen kurumları vesaire tanımıyorsun. Taraflardan bir tarafta güvendiğin bir ortam olduğunu beğenmiyorsun. Ve sen alıcı satıcı olarak onun içindesin. Genel yasal güvencelerin dışına çıkmış bir şekilde sadece sisteme, piyasa işleyişine güvendiğin için olması. Burada seni koruyacak bir şeylerin bir yerlerde arka planda olması. Oralarda gelecek zaten. Kripto varlıklar. Ya bunun daha da ötesi var. Bunu ilk başta sistemin içindeki hali hazırdaki kontrol edilebilir olanlarla bir düzenleme yapı içerisinde oturtmalıyız ki daha sonrasında bu DeFi boyutlarındaki kısımları hatta bunu daha ötesindeki geleceğin finansal boyutlarındaki yerleri tespit edebilir. İşte bunlar için kolay. Bu tartışmalar bu yüzden. Şimdi al şöyle devam ettirelim.
It's really important to record your efforts because if at any time someone says to you, "Oh, you were flying," you don't always show. Yes, we are on the way. We are trying to our best to get there. Obviously, it might help you, it might not. But in my experience, normally, it's especially with new regulation, new imposition, there is a little bit of wiggle room with timing. So please. Ian and Kobe, what do you have to say about that? Would you like to share some practical strategies?
Ian first.
Okay, yeah.
No, look, I echo this, and I think there are some other points to make around mergers and acquisitions, and I think, what needs to be considered there. So I think, actually, why don't you go in and jump into the M&A practicalities a little bit about to use the time?
So I will address two practicalities. One, regarding what you mentioned, Simon, even in large organizations that are doing third-party risk for a long time, there are a lot of situations we encounter in which the inherent risk rating or the risk profile has been done once per vendor, and it's a thing that needs to be changed. There are multiple engagements per ICT in large organizations, and a lot of the times they find themselves surprised by the fact that they underestimated the risk. And when they do a process, they realize that they need to assess or to strengthen the controls over a certain ICT. So I would say that a risk modeling should be done fairly quickly. In large organizations, there is also the practical issue of workload within the organization. Most of the times, the risk department or procurement doesn't have all the oversight or all the data needs to be collected internally from business owners in order to correctly understand the risk. This is one element, and if you are small, that's fairly easy to do. And on the other end, reach out to all the vendors, at least for the initial triage, in terms of the process that I believe will be checked is whether you've done something in the interface with the vendor and not necessarily only the small portion of the critical ICTs, reaching out to them with a triage, or if it's already an existing and assessed ICT, reaching out again with the delta, which is required by DORA specifically. That would be a good starting point that afterwards you can build further the program. Last thing, there are out-of-the-box vendor disclosure processes. This is what's called best practices because you don't need to reinvent the wheel, as we always say.
Okay. Thank you. Let's move on to the next question. And you mentioned we need to talk about M&A, like mergers and acquisitions. We have to talk about it. Clearly, it will affect, how, clearly to affect it, but how does the compliance with DORA impact M&A activity for organizations?
Yeah, well, mergers and acquisitions, right, which is where me and my team specializes spend most of our time. It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry, first of all. So in itself, it's relying on the financial markets, DORA to be resilient. I was talking about, people paying for their groceries earlier and whatnot, as well as also sustaining a multi-trillion-dollar M&A market. And it's also storing, to store value. Store value of our efforts is in the system. So it's a critically important system. And as it relates to mergers and acquisitions, specifically, it's actually quite a complex landscape because it might be a financial institution that is over-regulated making an acquisition or a divestment, a carve-out itself, in which case all of that's going to have to be under the DORA regime and the regulators have to be watching. And if they're acquiring, say, a non-EU entity, and integrating that into their organization, that's a hard one to meet the DORA requirements. So there's post-merger integration considerations, there's due diligence considerations to understand what the current setup is. But it's even more complex than that because it may be, we spend a lot of our time working with private equity clients, both here in Europe, but also globally. Those PE clients themselves don't have to be DORA compliant as a fund. But any of their portfolio companies do, and any of the acquisitions that they're looking to make, that might be a DORA regulated entity or indeed a third-party provider for a DORA regulated for an EU financial services business does need to be looked at. And so what we typically do is, Mikhail, things like cyber due diligence, technology due diligence, data privacy due diligence. When you're looking at that in the context of a DORA regime, you're obviously going to have to look at the target business in the context of areas that are important for that regulation, which is, so as we talked about, the governance regime to set up, their kind of incident response plan, their security testing, frankly, the gap analysis for the DORA and any cost to achieve. Now, this is where it comes back to, this is why I like M&A, because this is where the rubber hits the road, because what an investor will look at, say, okay, you don't have these controls in place. Well, if you don't have that in place, that's going to have a financial impact. It's just going to cost you money to close that gap, and therefore that's going to have a multiplier impact on the deal. Of course, the other way around is also true. If you're actually very good comparative to other investments, you actually might get that, more like a more indicator. And this is where cybersecurity and regulation, being good at this stuff and having a good track record of it, can actually come back to the value in your business and frankly the efficiency of the business. We quite often do cyber due diligence where things come out before And it actually slows down the transaction. It means there's more, scrutiny, there's more SPA kind of definitions that you put in place, there's more financial impact. So having all this tied up well with the RSP and will make your M&A activity a lot smoother and potentially improve valuations of businesses.
I would just want to add to this one, obviously, in any situation, if you are selling a business, if you are selling, and you are not fully compliant or you are not slightly compliant, if you can't amend, apart from moving the obviously the on the purchase price for your business, you might have to also provide indemnities and we definitely need to provide warranties now. These are all warranties now, but we also be probably required to provide indemnity, which is gonna, unless you take indemnity insurance, it's gonna hovering over your head. And someone who wants to exit by a sale of this business and go and live in there, under might have a big definitely compliance is extreme.
Mesela bakın burada önemli bir şey de söylemek istiyorum size. Bu hafta sonu geçen bir konuşma üzerinden Türkiye'de inşaat firmaları genelde borca batık şekilde çalışırlar. Hani şu anda hali hazırda elinde nakitle değil, gelecekte edileceği gelirin finansmanında krediler politikası sağlayıp işlerini sürdürme planlamasındadır. Yani bu ne olur? Senin eğer geniş bir kredi limitin varsa, borçlanabiliyorsan piyasadan, itibar varsa ve sen tekrar bunu ödüyorsan, bu durumda İnşaat sektörünün işlerini yapmaya devam edersin. Aksi takdirde hani eğer ödeme kapasiten yoksa, kredi limitlerini açamıyorsan, alamıyorsan paraları, o zaman çoğunlukla bankruptcy ve batışa doğru girişi sergilersin. Şimdi bazı firmalar da işte müteahhitler de şunu yapmaya çalışıyor. Benim firmamın Findex kredi notu yüksek olsun. Bu yüksek not sayesinde ben firmamın borçlanabilirlik kapasitesini arttırayım. Sonuçta neler var? Bu şirketlerin kendi çek defterleri oluyor. O çek defterinin her birine belli bir meblağlarda paralar yazabiliyorsun işlemini yaparken. Ne oluyor? Diyor ki benim atıyorum, örnek veriyorum, her biri 50.000'den 20 sayfalık çek defterim var. Bunu 50 çarpı 20.000 dediğinde bu kadar bir kredi limitim var diye başka tarafa güç olarak gösteriyor. Diyor ki bak ben şu anda iş yapamıyorum. Sen örneğin Serhat'ın firması batık vaziyettesin. Sen kredi alamıyorsun. Gel biz birleşelim. Firma olarak ikimiz bir araya gelelim. Sen benim firmama şu kadar bir ödeme yap. Şu anda yapamıyorsun ama ben bir iş alıyorum. Yapacağın işten paydan bana şu kadar ver. Benim firmamın kredisi. Şimdi teknik olarak baktığında normalde piyasada hiçbir şekilde fon bulamayacak taraftaki Serhat iş portföyünden ötürü iş yapmaya devam edebilirken benim kredinizi üzerinden kullanmaya devam edebilir mi? Edebilir. Ama şimdi da ortaya bir sorun çıktı. Acaba benim firmamın değerliliği ikimiz beraber ortaklık kurduğumuz veya şirketimizi birleştirdiğimiz için benim firmamın değeri düşecek mi? Ya da Serhat'ın firmasının değeri artacak. Önemli bir soru. Bu bir sorunsal, yapılması gereken bir değerli ve fiyatlama var. Ve hani buradan gelecek şey uluslararası bir katlanacak. İşte şu anda bu olarak tartışılan şey %90-95 oranında bununla örtüşen. Ne olur acaba? Firmalar satılıyor, el değiştiriyor, birleşiyor, ayrışıyor. Bazıları burada yasal uyum tamamen sağlamışken bazıları sağlamamış vaziyette. Ne olacak? Gerçek hayattan örneklendirmek istiyorum. Ne düşünüyorsunuz? Sizce ne olur? Birazdan uygulamalarda belki gelecektir karşınıza bu tarz sorular. Şurada devam etsin. Az kaldı.
Absolutely. That's where things like transaction liability insurance come in to actually move that process, take those risks out of the W&I process so that you can, have an insurance-backed component so you can sit on the beach in the Bahamas and not be tied into some, kind of capital risk on your head for a few years. The last thing I mentioned, and we are on the London Stock Exchange, the other thing is IPOs, right? And that's where having all this in place is actually very important for that It's equally as important because, again, even though you might be listed in UK Stock Exchange, London Stock Exchange, we just talked about how that will be still regulated, and the fines. Investors don't like fines, right? They don't like surprises, and so having all this in place will just make you a more robust company and a more attractive company to your investors.
Absolutely, and essentially, you might have a situation whereby you have obligations to do them afterward, right?
Yeah.
So, to follow all these things. So, listen, we only have another 7 minutes, so I'm gonna be, I have 2 more questions, and I have some questions from the audience. So if we don't manage to answer everything, we will try to send those later on, and I'll do a post with some answers to those from the panel members. So the next question I have is like, what's next? So what do companies expect in a few years' time? Like, what is coming after this DORA regulation? Ian, do you want to start quickly?
Yeah, just briefly. If you get down the line of where this is going, I think one of the exciting things that DORA enables is actually CBDCs or central bank digital currencies. There's already preparations underway with the EU for an EU digital currency. The same in all the major economies looking at this: UK, US, China is actually quite far down the line on a digital renminbi. I think what it all does is make this whole digital architecture resilient for digital currencies. And I think ultimately, if you look at the timeline, certainly by the end of this decade, we will be all using digital currencies, and quite possibly before then. And so I really see DORA as being an enabler for that, and exciting times ahead in terms of how we will be doing business in the future.
Yeah, there's one. Absence from DORA. You scout for DORA, you won't see references to AI. And so it's a bit of an elephant in the room. And of course, you've got the EU AI Acts. The key thing to my mind is that AI assurance is going to be increasingly coming to the fore. It should come down again to criticality, deploying AI within risk-based guardrails. What does that mean? It means thorough risk assessment. It's taking AI-specific threats like data poisoning into account during those risk assessments. It means resilience of supporting infrastructure that AI is running on. In critical environments, it means subjecting AI to stress testing, trying to break it, trying to fool it. All of that is consistent with the principles that you see in DORA. It's just not mentioned explicitly. So don't forget about AI, because it's going to be super important. So I think that's my key point on this thing.
Okay.
I would just add to one point in terms of how I see the trajectory in terms of business. DORA is one of a set of regulations that, if you look on the ICT space, it's quickly evolving to become a serious business enabler. The inability of companies to be able to continuously assure their security posture, their compliance posture in front of their customers and the regulators will quickly evolve into the inability to do business. We start to see that in other sectors that we operate, like the defense sector, the CMC, and that will be, I think, the next step with DORA, that those who fail or don't invest well enough in the process will have an impact in terms of their ability to operate with financial institutions that will require that.
Yeah. Thanks. Well, we'll have to see how it goes. One final question. If we have some more time, we'll do the other ones. But what are some of the, and briefly, what are some of the practical, urgent actions every company that will be bought within the regulation should take now?
En acil eylemlerden söz ediyor şu anda.
Let's start with Toby.
mapping all your vendors and classifying them and reaching out to all your vendors accordingly and triaging them as a first must-have step.
Burada da ölçekle beraber makine öğrenmesi modelleriyle sınıflama yöntemleri de kullanılıyor eşyalarla.
Sorry, Simon?
Identify critical business processes and the information technology assets that support those processes and the dependencies on third-party support provision. So getting on top of your third-party base is massively important. There's going to be a focus on this from the competent authorities, they're called. Your regulator, basically, super fast. You're going to need to get those registers completed, get on top of your third parties and talk to them.
Okay. Ian? Do you have a third one?
Yeah, I do. Building on the earlier point about this isn't just about technical risk, it's the financial risk. So your retail financial quantification exercise, and Simon mentioned some techniques for that, but actually companies like Aon have stores of proprietary data over loss profile, that's very sure. But actually the reason we have that is because making sure your balance sheet is protected, whether it's a cybersecurity loss or a tech local loss, which is if you're a tech provider, you're providing technology services, or things like directors and officers, insurance, etc. If you're part of the executive team, this all comes down to making sure that your business is protected. We have to make the assumption today, and in particular today, that cyber breaches will occur, data breaches will occur, and therefore you have to be protected and ready for that, both in terms of incident response, but also the financial impacts that the litigation costs, the protection costs that come out the back of it. So my advice would be make sure you have adequate and sufficient maturity to back up all of the technical things that the two gentlemen have mentioned.
Bu arada bu şekilde kapatıyoruz buraya ama mesela bunu şöyle bir örnek vereceğim. Günün ortalarında bir yerde bir haber düştü. Amerika'yı biz teknik olarak güçlü olarak kabul ediyoruz biliyorsunuz ki. Şimdi Amerika'da bile bir bakanlığın ekranları, eşyanlı yayın yapan ekranlarına hacklendiği ve burada yapay zeka ile üretilmiş fake bir videonun verildiği, oynatıldığı bilgisi yayıldı. Şimdi bu efsane bir şey. Yani genel açıklamana baktığınız zaman bir devlet başkanı gidip bir açıklama yapıyor. Dünyanın en güçlü olduğunu varsaydığı devletlerden biri. Yaptığı açıklamalar sonrasında bir siber saldırıya o ülkenin kendi bakanlığının maruz kaldığı bilgisi. Yani bunun finansal piyasanın üzerindeki etkisini hayal edin. Nasıl bir noktaya getiriyor. Bunların bir de direkt firmalar üzerinde olduğunu düşündüğümüzde dayanım gücü görecek daha sınırlı olan yapılarda korkunç sonuçlarla karşılaşmak olası. Bunlara yönelik işte bir hazırlık yapılması zorunlu ve kaçamazsınız. Teknolojiden kaçabilmeniz imkanı yok. Dijital içinde yaşıyoruz. Ona karşı tedbirli olmayı öğrenmeniz lazım. Ne kadar tedbir alırsanız alın, genelde yasanın dışında iş yapan kişiler yasanın bir adım çoğunlukla önünde olurlar. Mevzuatı birçoğu aradaki boşlukları okuyor, biliyor, oralardan girmeyi biliyor. Bazen yapılan eylem bireyleri ve tarafları, şirketleri zarara sokarken yasaların içerisinde kalınarak yapılıyor. O yüzden bunları anlamak, öğrenmek önemli. Sonrasında işte bahsettiğim kripto varlıklarla ilgili kısmı geliyor. Onun ardından kara paranın aklanması ve güçlerin tanınması ilkesi ilgili kısımlar geliyor. Şöyle şunu göstereyim. Bu 11 dakikalık bir video izletmeyeceğim. Linkini atacağım. Burada güçlerin tanımlanması, money laundering ve know your customer compliance ile ilgili bir yapı tanıtım var. Bu da kısa böyle 10 dakikalık kadar bir video. 1 dakikalık bir video, özür diliyorum. Bunlarla geldiğiniz zaman örneklerle çıkarımlar yapılması lazım. Burada da topu size alacağız. Direkt gene hands-on exercise şeklinde siz birebir bir işe girerek bakacaksınız. Türkiye örneğine götüreceğim çünkü daha sonrası. Burada böyle birazcık size bahsedelim. Revolt örneğimiz var baktığında M26, Klarna, TransferWise gibi bir sürü fintech girişimlerin analizleri gerçekleştiriliyor. Bunlara bir bakarsınız neler olduğunu. Çünkü bu işlerin dikkat ediyorsanız en tepesinde çıkan şey fintechler, finansal teknoloji yatırımları ve bunlarla ilgili gelişen startuplar. Bu büyük firmalar, bankalar, bunları alıp bunların ürettiği teknolojiyi kendilerine transfer ederek fark yaratmaya çalışıyorlar. İşte biraz önce o klasik inşaat firmasının örneğinden bahsettiğim şey de böyle bir şey. Bunların bilgiyi dahil etmenin artıları var. Belli başlı eksileri de var. Bunlar firmaya net artı değer olarak bir şeyler sağlıyorsa o zaman iyi bir noktadayız. İşte bu yüzden sizin piyasada böyle bazı başarılı fintech uygulamalara bakmanız lazım. Çünkü fintech ile ilgili Avrupa Birliği'nde yapılan bu ekosistemdeki düzenlemeler birçok noktada etki yaratacak. Yarattığı bu etkiler çeşitli alanlardan Amerika'dan bazen Avrupa'ya, bazen Çin'e, bazen bunların etkisinden Türkiye'ye, Rusya'ya ya da uzak doğu taraflara doğru farklı kanallarda yapacak. Dünyaya sonuçta biz ne diyorduk artık? Böyle tek bir bölge sıkışık bir halde değil, hepsi bir etkileşim halinde. Buraya erişebilmek için de işte bizlerin belli başlı eylemler alması gerekiyor. Baktığımda en temelde tartışılan konular ne diye? Geleneksel bankalarla dijital bankalar arasında bir rekabet unsuru diye çıkıyor. Tüketici davranışlarının değişmesi ve müşteri deneyiminin farklılaşması. Benim en net bir şekilde bunu özümsediğim yer McDonald's şubeleri arkadaşlar. McDonald's şubelerinde geçmiş zamanda bir sürü kasa olurdu. Kasadan gider standart siparişler. Şu anda artık dijital ekranlar var. Müşteriler insanlarla etkileşime geçmek istemiyor. Ekranlar üzerinden her şeyi kimseye bir şey anlatmadan kendi tuşlara basarak çözmeler. Kasada zoraki bir kişiyi bulsanız, ben bir insanla muhatap olmak istediğim dediğiniz zaman bile zorlanıyorsunuz. Arka tarafında bir şey mutfağında o işin insanın yapması gereken taraftan birini size yönlendirir. Bu akışlar finansal sistemlere bir sürü değişiklik olacak. Mesela kendi örneğimi vereyim size. Ben bankadan para alma, para çekme işlemlerini yapmak istemiyorum bir sürü demontajı. Doğal kaynaklara saygılı olmak adına dekont sonuçta bir kağıt, dijital ortamda dökülen bir şey. Bir insan kaynağı kullanıyoruz. Bu benim işim orada sıra beklersen zaman kaybediyorsun. Bir sürü yönden dezavantaj noktası var. Ama belirli limitlerin üstünü ATM'lerde yaptığımız imkanı yok. Ne var? Şubeye gidiyorsun. Şubeden limit altı işlemlerle ilgili bir sıraya aldığın takdirde gidip bankamatik üzerinden o dijital ortamda hiçbir şekilde müşteri temsilcisinin, gişe personeli görmeden sen gidip işlemi dijital olarak gerçekleştirebiliyorsun. Ve şube içinde bekleme süren 10 dakikadan bankamatik kullanıcı 1 dakika 2 dakikadan kısa bir süreye düşüyor. Hızlı. İçeride bankanın güvenliğiyle beraber yapılacak aynı şekilde güvenli mi? Aynı şekilde. Bunlar artılar, çevrim ihtiyaçlar, müşterinin yaşamak istediği deneyimlere göre şekillenen şeyler. Ve bunlar bu dijitalleşmeyle sağlanmaktadır. Çağ daha da gelişecek. Belki bambaşka bir hale gelecek. Yani en son Orhan Can Hoca'yı davet ettiğimizde dijital paradan bahsediyor. Artık fiziki olan bir şeyi kullanmayacağımızı devreye girebileceğimizden söz ediyor. Bunlar önemli şeyler. Ama bu geldiği zaman da o dijitalin korunması geliyor. İşte siber güvenlik ve veri izleyiciler listler gibi yapılar. Pazarların birbirlerinin entegrasyonu, bunların birbirine göre rekabet avantajları ve dezavantajları durumları. Ve gelecekte ne olacağıyla ilgili yapalım. Bakınız biz ülkemiz açısından bu konuyla ilgili Bloomberg'de çok güzel bir değerlendirme yakaladık. Banka ve fintech sektöründe değişen regülasyonlar ve bunların akışla ilgili. Sınavlar üstünde bunların da sunumları var. Bunları da siz kendiniz bir takip edebilirsiniz. Kendi temponuzdan, kendi ihtiyacınızdan. Bugün böyle bir ders planlamasında birazcık sıkıntılar yaşadık. Çok siz de dediğim gibi imzayı atmayanlar ders çıkışında kaydedildikten sonra gelip benim yanımda atabilirler. Bana soracak bir şeyler var mı? Yoksa şu tahmin şeyi alayım. Ders bunu değerlendirme anketinin sonuç olarak. Eğer hani şey olursa direkt WhatsApp'a atabilirsiniz. İkinci konunun sonuna geldik. Üçüncü konuya geçeceğiz. Zonguldak bu hafta karlı, hava muhalefeti yönünden eksilerde zor. Uzun süredir böyle olmamıştı. Bakalım bundan sonrasında ne yapacağız? Teşekkür ediyorum arkadaşlar. Haftaya görüşürüz. Kaydı bir gruplayın hemen.